Theodore.
There's another story coming right up, and you can always learn more about Theodore Tugboat on the internet. Find us through PBS Online.
Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Voda, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
Hello. Well, did you know that it was me under all these winter clothes? Huh? I've got something really interesting to show you. Come here. It's in here somewhere. Yeah. Look at this. Now, what do you think that is? Huh? Did you guess that it was a fruit? You see, I was just down at the docks, and I met a ship that came from far, far away, where these fruits come from. And the captain of the ship, well, he gave me one. Certainly looks strange to me. Of course, you know that you can't always tell about something by the way that it looks from the outside. The tugboat certainly found that out the day the ice ship arrived.
The big harbor was in the middle of a big freeze. From the snowdrifts drooping down over the tugboat's dock, all the way up to the long icicles hanging from Benjamin Bridge, everything was cold and frosty and frozen. Now, work never stops in the big harbor, even on the most wintry day. And on this particular wintry day, George, Theodore, and Hank had just finished moving a cargo ship out to the ocean. "It sure is cold," shouted Theodore. "Oh, cold doesn't bother tugs like us," grunted George. "We're brave." "We're brave," shouted Hank, and he blew up some smoke just like George. "Hank," George grinned, "you have a great big icicle hanging from your nose." Hank grinned and the icicle popped right off. Theodore and George chuckled. "Hank, you always make everyone laugh." "What's that noise?" said George. A strange, creaky sound was coming from behind Shipwreck Rock. "It sounds," said Hank, "like a giant shark." But George floated forward. "Oh, giant sharks don't bother brave tugs like us." Then he slowed down a little just in case it was a giant shark. The creaky sound was getting louder and louder. Yes, something was appearing, and it was appearing from around Shipwreck Rock. At first, the tugs could only see the very tip-top of the thing. It was all spiky and white. And then, slowly, it floated out. What is that?" said Theodore, who could hardly speak. "It looks like an ice palace," Hank breathed in amazement. The big white floating thing did look a little like a palace all made of ice, and that ice made it creak as it floated towards the tugs. "Oh, that's probably just a rusty old wreck covered in ice," snorted George. Now, the tugs could see an anchor, all covered in ice and snow. "It's a ship!" shouted Hank. "If it is a ship," said Theodore, "we should help it into our harbor." The tugs were full of questions for the ice ship as they moved it into the big harbor. "How did you get all covered in ice?" asked Theodore. "Where'd you come from?" said Hank. "What's your name?" demanded George. Well, the ice ship didn't answer. It just made its creaky sound as it floated along. "I bet he can't speak because of all the ice," said Theodore. "I wonder who he is under there," Hank whispered. "Probably some useless rust bucket like I said," snorted George. "Come on, let's get him to the dock." The next morning, the ice ship was floating exactly where the tugs had left it, tied to its dock. Its ice still made that creaky sound as it rolled a little on the waves. The tugs floated past on their way to work. "Hello, Squeaky," George called to the ice ship. Well, all the other tugs laughed, except for Theodore. "I wouldn't like it if everyone laughed at me," he thought to himself. Theodore floated over to the ship. "Hello," he called. "My name is Theodore. I helped bring you into the harbor, remember?" The ice ship was silent, except for its creak, creak, creak sound. "Maybe he can't hear me because of all the ice," Theodore thought. "I was just wondering, what is your name?" It seemed to Theodore that the ice ship creaked just a little bit louder as if he wanted to tell him something. "Come on, Theodore," said George. "That old ship is good for nothing, and we have important work to do." "I have to go now," Theodore said to the ice ship. "But I'll come visit tomorrow if you like." "Okay," smiled Theodore. "I'll see you tomorrow." Theodore didn't know why, but he felt that underneath all that cold ice on the ship was a nice warm engine, and just maybe a friend. The following day, the tugs were all gathered round the dispatcher for the morning work meeting. "Theodore, Hank," said the dispatcher, "there is a ship out at the grain dock. He is in the way of the other ships." Theodore realized right away the dispatcher was talking about the ice ship. "Yes, Hank, George, and I took him there," said Theodore. "He's covered in ice." "I know," said the dispatcher. "I would like you to move him to the junk dock." "But, sir," said Theodore, swallowing the big lump in his throat, "the junk dock is for ships who aren't good for anything." "I'm sorry, Theodore, but George tells me that ice ship doesn't move or even speak. We can't have him floating in that dock. There are other ships who need to stay there. Please, move him to the junk dock." Move him to the junk dock? The dispatcher's words made Theodore suddenly feel as cold as if he was covered in ice. Theodore and Hank went to get the ice ship. "We have to move you to another dock," Theodore said to the ship. "Unless you don't want us to. All you have to do is tell us where you'd like to go instead." But the ice ship still said nothing. "Hank," said Theodore sadly, "we better get started." "This ship sure is heavy with all that ice," puffed Theodore. "If we could get the ice off him," huffed Hank, "we could pull it faster." "That's a great idea," said Theodore. "It is?" said Hank. "I mean, it is. Theodore, what is my great idea?" "We'll get the ice off him," said Theodore. "Then everyone will see that underneath he's really a great ship. Hank, I know what to do." Theodore and Hank pulled the ice ship to a small cove. "It's warm in this little cove," explained Theodore. "The sun will melt the ice. All we have to do is wait." Well, the tugs waited and waited and waited. And the ice ship did begin to melt. Drip by drip by drip. "Wake up, Hank," tooted Theodore. "Did he melt yet?" yawned Hank. "Almost," frowned Theodore. "One icicle melted." "Great," said Hank. "Only about a zillion billion more to go." The tugs heard a sharp whistle. It was Pearl, the pilot boat. "You're supposed to be taking that ship to the junk dock," said Pearl. "You better get going." Well, Theodore and Hank had done their best, but now it really was time to take the ice ship to the junk dock. The two tugs raced into position, but they were so worried about being late they bumped right into each other. "Hank," said Theodore, "turn around." Hank turned all right, but in the same direction as Theodore, and once again, they bumped into each other. "Hank," shouted Theodore, "turn the other way." Theodore and Hank looked around to see if Pearl was watching, but Pearl was staring at something else. The ice ship was shaking and making its creak, creak, creak sound louder and louder. And then a little ice fell from the ship. And that's when Theodore realized something wonderful. "He's laughing," shouted Theodore. "He's laughing, Hank. You gave me another great idea." "I did?" said Hank. I did. Theodore, what is my other great idea?" "All we have to do is make him laugh some more," said Theodore. "If he laughs, I bet he'll shake off all that ice." "But," said Hank, "how do we make him laugh?" "You can do it," shouted Theodore. "You always make everyone laugh." "Sure," said Hank. Hank made his silliest face. Theodore and Hank laughed and laughed, and once again, the ice ship creaked even louder this time. Hank decided to do his very funniest thing. He rolled his eyes and went around and around in a circle, tooting his whistle. Theodore went racing right behind him, tooting his whistle and hooting with laughter. Hank was so excited, he bumped right into Theodore again. Hank, frowned Theodore. Well, that's not funny. Well, the most incredible thing happened. The ice ship creaked and creaked, shaking more and more ice off himself. A little at first, and then in great big chunks. And as he laughed and laughed, he shook and shook. And you know what? It wasn't long before all the ice was gone. And there, in its place, was a beautiful sea trawler. "Top of the morning to you, tugboats," said the trawler. "You sure are funny." Theodore and Hank, they could only stare at the ship in amazement. "Allow me to introduce myself," said the ship. "My name is Seamus, and I'm a sea trawler." My name is Tugboat, and I'm a Hank," said Hank, who was so surprised to see such a beautiful ship he couldn't even speak properly. "How did you get all covered in ice?" asked Theodore. "I was fishing way out on the cold North Sea," replied Seamus, "when a big storm came along and covered me up stem to stern in ice. Now, if it wasn't for you tugs making me laugh so hard, I'd probably be frozen all winter long." "In the junk dock," shivered Hank. And then the tugs remembered. They were supposed to be moving Seamus to the junk dock. "Well," said Seamus, "I don't think I'm ready for any junk dock." "He looked like an old good-for-nothing ship with all that ice on him," said Pearl. "But underneath, I can see he's really a fine ship. We don't need to take him to the junk dock." "There is one place I'd like to take him," said Theodore, and he grinned at Hank. The other tugs were at the great ocean dock when Theodore and Hank came along, pulling Seamus. "What a great sea trawler!" gasped George. "I wonder where he came from." "Oh, you know him, George," called Theodore. "I do?" frowned George. "Well, you call him Squeaky, but his real name is Seamus," said Theodore. "Seamus thought your name was Smoky," Hank said to George. Well, all the tugs had a very good laugh about that. Even George laughed, and he blew up some more smoke. "Well, I thought you were just a rusty wreck," smiled George. "What's all that stuff on your deck?" "Oh, well, that's my special equipment, Georgie," replied Seamus. "It helps me find my way around when I'm out in the ocean all alone for months at a time." "All alone on the ocean for months?" gasped George. "You're really brave. Can you tell me some of your ocean stories?" "Ah, sure," said Seamus, with a hearty smile in his voice. "If you show me the way out of the harbor, I've got fishing to do." Well, you didn't have to ask George twice. George showed Seamus the way out of the big harbor, and all the way those two talked about some of the ocean adventures they'd had. All the tugs were sad to see Seamus leave, but the saddest one of all was George. "Toodaloo, Georgie," tooted Seamus. "Goodbye, Seamus," whistled George. George watched his new friend leave. "What a great ship," he said softly to himself. "What a great ship."
You know, Seamus the sea trawler really was a great ship under all that ice, wasn't he? But you know, that story has got me thinking. I wonder what this strange-looking fruit is like inside. Huh? Shall we take a look? Oh, it certainly looks delicious. Well, thanks for visiting us here in the Big Harbor. We'll see you all again next time. Oh, it is delicious. Oh, this is wonderful.